Hey friend, welcome back to another video. If you're a new subscriber, I just want to say thank you so much. I know I gained a lot of subs after the XT4 review video, and I think it's my most watched video to date, which is pretty cool. But yeah, like I said then, don't expect a lot of review gear sort of videos here. I pick up new gear when I need it or when I'm really interested in something, but I really don't buy gear that often. So yeah, don't get used to that. But in this video, this is going to be another gear review because I wanted to try the Sirui or Sirui Anamorphic 133 lens for the X-Mount. So I bought it, I used it, I'm gonna be returning it, but I figured I would review it for you before I returned it. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. I'm gonna keep it as quick as I can. Two disclaimers before I get going. First, you should watch my full Grand Teton trip video because you'll really get to see this lens in action. And I think that's really important as you see my review because you'll get to see the use cases that I've put it through and the video that I made using it before deciding whether or not I should or shouldn't keep it. And second, I'm not gonna explain what anamorphic is. There are some great videos on that and I might put them in the pinned comment, but go watch those if you don't know what anamorphic is. As I go about this review, I'm gonna remind you a bunch of times, I think, that this lens is $800 and it's anamorphic. So we're getting an incredible deal. These amazing lenses are becoming more and more affordable, and I am super happy that indie filmmakers are gonna have a real option for anamorphic at an affordable price in the future. I think that is moving that direction, and I think this is really cool, but I will be returning it for the rest of the review. You'll see why. But I'm gonna keep coming back to the fact that it's $800 and it's anamorphic. So that's amazing. And if you're wanting to try anamorphic, or if you're willing to live with a few of the quirks that come with the cheaper anamorphic, and if you're willing to maybe even do some work to get around those, then you're gonna love this lens, and I really recommend that you get it. But it's not for me, and I'll tell you why. Stick around. So let's start with the anamorphic qualities in general, and I might hit on this a couple more times, but the anamorphic qualities in general just aren't all that strong. At 1.33 instead of at 2 times, the anamorphic just doesn't differentiate itself strong enough for me from a standard circular lens. So that's probably one of the biggest points of my review that I'll come back to. But again, for $800, it's more than I could ask for, but I don't see a big enough difference between this and other lenses that are just standard circular lenses. The biggest difference is the flares, and quite honestly, for a cheap anamorphic lens, and I know cheap is subjective, but it's anamorphic, it's really good. The flares are not like comically overdone, they're not always oversaturated, but in certain situations they're a little overly blue, and it's maybe a little more than I would prefer, though in certain situations it would totally work, and for me it just doesn't. And so yeah, the flares are actually pretty good. I don't think that they look like cheap flares, except sometimes for whatever reason the flares are much more pronounced and much more blue. As for the sharpness and the edge distortion, those are both common characteristics of anamorphic, is that they aren't that sharp and that there is distortion on the edges. And quite honestly, this again looks like a standard lens. It's pretty sharp and the edges aren't all that distorted, which you would think on a normal lens review is a positive thing, but for this one it actually ends up feeling like a normal circular lens without some of that anamorphic character. And for me, that actually ended up being a negative for this review, was that it felt maybe a little over sharp, even with a Pro Mist filter on there, which I did shoot with. And yeah, overall, again, it just felt more like a normal lens. Again, hitting that same thing with the bokeh, the 133, when it's desqueezed, ends up at a 2.4:1 aspect ratio. And quite honestly, when you desqueeze it, you lose a lot of the vertical or the cat's eye bokeh, And so for me, it just, again, didn't differentiate itself all that much from a standard lens. The bokeh wasn't very pronounced. Unless there was a flare in the shot, it was really difficult to tell that it was anamorphic. Now for the focal length and for the minimum focusing distance, those are two characteristics where this is a true anamorphic, because it's difficult for anamorphics to be made wide for technical reasons that are talked about in other videos. And it's also difficult for them to have a shorter focusing distance. And so this is a 50 millimeter, and it is about a 3-foot minimum focusing distance, and it just ends up being pretty far away. And so because of that, you end up shooting tight, but you can't get very close up on your subject. And so it ends up really feeling limiting. And so that is where this lens stays true to anamorphic, and it's actually a downside for me. Now, one of the nice things, but again, it makes it not feel like an anamorphic, is that shooting 1.33 anamorphic on a 16:9 sensor, really you don't need a desqueezed sensor, or you don't need a camera that can desqueeze or a monitor, because you can actually see the image pretty normally, and it's definitely good enough to pull focus, compose your image, and light the scene. So if you don't want to use a monitor, or if you don't have a camera that will desqueeze, then I think you'll be fine. I shot without desqueezing it on the X-T4, and it worked for me. But yeah, you can also record DCI if you want to get a little extra stretch on your image. That's just a fun fact I'm just throwing in here. As for the color rendition and the overall like optical character of the glass, it's honestly pretty standard. I felt like sometimes it wasn't all that accurate. Sometimes the color rendition wasn't perfect, but honestly, when you're shooting anamorphic and when you're shooting that style, when you're using this in appropriate situations where it fits the style, it actually ended up looking filmic, and I was happy at times when the color wasn't perfectly accurate. If you're looking for a technically correct lens with great color rendition, then I probably wouldn't say shooting with anamorphic is always your best bet anyway. But yeah, anyway, sometimes it's a little bit off, but overall the color rendition is actually pretty technically sound. Now, side by side with other lenses, I shot a few times side by side with my Sigma 18-35, zoomed in all the way to 35, and that right there is really what you keep hearing me say throughout the whole video, and this is why I'm returning it, is that I really couldn't see a significant enough difference if there were no flares in the frame between a 35 millimeter circular lens and this 50 millimeter, because weird math, but when you use a 50 millimeter, it's equivalent almost to like a 37.5. The math is weird for anamorphic lenses, but anyway, I couldn't hardly tell a difference, and the little extra field of view benefit that I got just wasn't worth it for me when I was shooting way tighter than I would have liked anyway. So I would rather just be able to zoom out, shoot at 24, get that extra field of view. So for me, I'm gonna be returning it because it just doesn't differentiate itself quite enough from a standard lens. Now, at the end here, I wanna add on, again, this is $800, so this is an incredible value, and also there are people who are doing modifications to this lens so that you get a 2x anamorphic bokeh, and they're making it, I think, either wider by using extension tubes, I can't remember, but anyway, if you want to fix some of the issues that I have with this lens, then you could make those modifications. For me, it just isn't worth it to fit it into my workflow. So I'm gonna stick with the Sigma 18-35 and crop the image at a 2:4 aspect ratio, 240 aspect ratio, and I'm gonna keep going with that. So yeah, that's the really short review. Checking my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything, but basically you get anamorphic, the flares, you get a little bit of that bokeh, and you can mod the lens to make it look more so. for 800 bucks. Super cool. I've repeated that a bunch, but again, it just isn't different enough for me from a standard lens. So that's it for this review. I hope you find it helpful. Stick around for more videos, and if you have any ideas, then please offer them below. I want to start talking more about actually making films, less about gear, and hopefully you'll see that in future videos. But that's it for this one. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.